moment will be crossing over to the British Council Hall, where there is a public forum ongoing under the theme Media, Hate Speech and Democratic Consolidation in Ghana. We have huge live speak. We'll be going there live, and there are speakers such as His Excellency Charles Abani, UN Resident Coordinator, Ghana, ongoing now. So we'll take it there.
The problem of hate speech is also being fueled by a growing polarization along partisan, ethnic, and religious lines. The perpetration of hate speech is also being aided by our largely unregulated and highly partisan traditional media sphere, and also being exacerbated by the increasing access and abuse of social media platforms. Ahead of the 2020 elections in Ghana, for example, the Media Foundation documented as many as 582 incidents of indecent, what we called indecent campaign language on radio. And that was just on radio, and we couldn't even monitor all the close to 500 radio stations that are on air. We monitored around 100 radio stations, and even on these platforms, we recorded as many as 582 incidents of expressions that were deemed indecent. It is significant to note that the most dominant forms of such indecent expressions were: 1, 313 incidents of insulting and offensive remarks, followed by 202 incidents of vitriolic, unsubstantiated allegations, and 28 incidents of comments inciting violence. Of course, there were other categories that recorded a few incidents. While these types of expressions may not necessarily pass for a typical hate speech, they certainly constitute potent precursors for hate speech. Hate speech has also been widely acknowledged as a dangerous phenomenon that can undermine not only democratic values, but also social stability and the overall peace of nations. There is significant evidence of how dire the consequences of hate speech can be. And this means we should, as a nation, never allow hate speech to proliferate in our country. Our democracy may have endured and withstood the challenges and implications of corruption, bad governance, and weak public institutions. But I doubt that our nation may have the capacity to endure yet another threat as serious as politics of hate speech. But the early signs are very clear. The truth is that we cannot afford to wait for a full-blown hate speech pandemic before we act. We have to admit that our democracy already has serious underlying conditions that will make a hate speech pandemic very disastrous for us. We therefore have to act now by adopting all the preventive measures necessary to deal with the problem of hate speech. And this explains why the Media Foundation for West Africa has a deep concern about the problem of hate speech. And this certainly is why we have convened this forum to support and elevate ongoing discussions about the problem in Ghana, and especially within the context of our democracy and next year's elections. It is our view that there cannot be a better way of dealing with the challenge of hate speech than to confront the problem through a multi-stakeholder effort. This is why we are very happy and delighted and honored, actually, to be partnering with the National House of Chiefs. And Kuno, we are grateful for your presence. The National Peace Council, Chairman, we are grateful for your partnership. And the National Media Commission. The Executive Secretary is here. Thank you very much for joining us on this journey. And in fact, I must acknowledge that the National Peace Council, for example, had taken the initiative and has gotten to the point of developing a manual that will guide our conversations going forward. I'm sure we'll hear quite a bit about that later on. I am confident that other stakeholders beyond those that I've mentioned would join us on this noble journey and the effort to root out hate speech and to keep our democracy peaceful, resilient, and make our future brighter. Once again, I thank you very much for honoring our invitation to be part of this important conversation and agenda for Ghana's democracy, our peace, and development. Thank you so much.
Let's give him another round of applause. And of course, the time to act is now, particularly as we get very close to election 2024. And for those of you who are election watchers, you know that every 8 years, elections are keenly contested in this country because of the feeling that after 8 years, for some reasons, some way, somehow, power must change hands. Well, we'll now introduce our chairman for today's occasion, and Suleimana talked about the National Peace Council. Yes, they've launched the guidelines on hate speech and other forms of indecent expression. He is the chairperson of the National Peace Council. Let's welcome Reverend Dr. Ernest Edujemfi with a round of applause.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Winston. The UN Resident Coordinator, members of the Diplomatic Corps represented this morning, the representative of the National House of Chiefs, the Executive Director of the Media Foundation for West Africa, distinguished panelists for this occasion, distinguished guests invited to be with us this morning, friends from the media fraternity, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to chair this august meeting this morning as we continue to find ways to stem the growing trend of hate speech in the media space and in the public discourse in our country. This forum is indeed timely as our democracy is constantly threatened by hate speech. Unfortunately, the media, a significant tool for the consolidation of our democracy, is the channel through which this menace is being perpetuated. Hate speech is defined by the Oxford Dictionary as abusive or threatening speech or writing that expresses prejudice based on ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, or similar grounds. Ladies and gentlemen, democratic governance structures all over the world have at various stages of their emergence and consolidation suffered some form of vulnerability due to the behavior of their citizenry in the use of hate speech with its attendant consequences. In some places, the use of hate speech has led to violent conflicts with devastating consequences on lives and property. Hate speech, for example, is known to be one of the major causes of the 1994 Rwanda genocide. There is also substantial evidence about the role hate speech played in contributing to the political crisis in Kenya between 2007 and 2008, and that the Republic of Cote d'Ivoire in 2011. In Ghana, the story is not different, as the phenomenon of hate speech and indecent form of expression have suddenly grown and have become a threat to the Ghanaian society. The proliferation of such behavior is more noticeable and enhanced during election years. Potentially explosive political statements from different sides of the political divide were observed in the run-up to the 2008, 2012, 2016, 2020 presidential and parliamentary elections in the country. Hate speech and other forms of indecent expression have been recorded in several other instances in our political space. In some instances, though not common, there had been derogatory remarks and insinuations cast by one ethnic group or tribe against another. These have resulted in some tension between ethnic and tribal groups that have the potential to disturb the peace of the country. Lately, social media platforms have become an essential tool for communication and has been competing on the media landscape, consequently expanding the path for freedom of expression. The strength of democracy in any given country can be measured by the extent to which the citizenry enjoys its freedom of expression. It is through them that individuals exercise their fundamental freedoms or rights of expression in addition to exchanging information and ideas. The 2020 Black Lives Matter protests in the US and the Arab Spring Revolution in 2021 are examples of the formidable role of social media platforms in the fight for fundamental human rights and freedoms of expression. The freedom of expression or speech does not, however, give the citizenry of any country the right to either speak or publish without required responsibility. Constitutional values or social media are usually under immense pressure, and the use of democracy is not left behind. Online media firms admit that not only extremists, terrorists, and other undemocratic groups use the platforms to advance their messages. It is therefore imperative that Ghana, like nations across the world, must encourage social media firms to urgently do something regarding hate speech and other forms of intemperate language. Act 818, establishing the National Peace Council, mandates the Council in Section 2 to facilitate and develop mechanisms for conflict prevention, management, resolution, and to build sustainable peace in the country. It is in the light of this that the National Peace Council, in partnership with the National Media Commission, the Media Foundation for West Africa, among others, developed the guidelines on hate speech and other forms of indecent expression. This is to guide all of us as citizens, officials of various institutions, and political actors in the performance of our duties and engagement with each other, especially in the media space. It is to help us act in a responsible manner to promote tolerance, inclusion, and respect for each other. It is important, ladies and gentlemen, to know that the role of the media cannot be ignored in this process. Hence, they provide the public access to information, create awareness, and facilitate public debate and discussions that must be conducted with strict adherence to professionalism and ethical standards. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, while hate speech, inciting comments, and other indecent expression can be used on different platforms and on separate occasions, the mass media, as major enabler of public discourse, have often been the medium through which such expressions are unfortunately used the most. In some instances, the media have doubled the evil, or fueled or fanned, amplified such behavior with some exciting comments. Hate speech and other forms of indecent expression could potentially get worse when there is decline in professional standards or ethical journalism, which is further aggravated by the partisan ownership of media houses, the increasing number of media operators, and the attendant effect of commercialization, as well as other challenges. Ladies and gentlemen, let us remember that Ghana is the gateway of Africa. As a gateway of Africa, must continue to embrace multi-ethnic coexistence, diversity of thought, eschew negative communication, and rather build on positivity of our diversity for better growth and development in all sectors of our country. It is my hope that our distinguished panelists will provide all of us, or provoke all of us, to redefine the Ghana we want to have. A Ghana where respect will overcome hate and where diversity will triumph over self. Once again, you are welcome to today's forum. Let us contribute together to develop a robust framework that is able to prevent hate, indecent, and abusive expression. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Reverend Dr. Ernest Edujemfi, who is chairman of the National Peace Council. Of course, let's redefine the Ghana that we want, where respect, okay, where we focus on respect instead of hate. After all, as a country, we have said that our democracy thrives so much on free speech. We have interpreted it loosely as kebi mamin kebi. It means all of us have a voice within our democracy. So if we all have a voice, that voice certainly should not be hate speech. Thank you once again, Reverend Dr. Ernest Edu-Gyamfi. Would now invite the President of the Eastern Regional House of Chiefs and the Kono of Manya Krobo, Nene Sakite II, for some brief remarks. Let's welcome him.
Good morning, everybody. Executive Director, National Peace Council Chairman, United Nations Representative, the German Ambassador. If in case I have inadvertently missed somebody, just accept my apology. Your presence is acknowledged. I'm pleased to be here this morning with all these distinguished personalities, most of whom I would say this is the first time to deliberate on an important issue facing this nation today. And we must sincerely make a commitment to tackle this problem of hate speech head on. When one goes around the world, sometimes to meet with groups of people, decent people, mostly minorities, they are always crying out for assistance on hate speech. That's where sometimes one will question the effectiveness of our democratic institutions. But then, one question that often pops up in my mind is that how do you make laws and regulations on hate speech where at the same time watching your back on the notion of freedom of expression, freedom of speech, human rights of the people, and so on and so forth? Ironically, the irony is that most oftentimes in Ghana, the major players or offenders include our legislators and other politicians on their campaign trails. Whereas our premier international body and the UN representative is here, the UN currently has their undivided attention on, and I quote, protecting human rights and preventing atrocities to sustaining peace, achieving gender equality, and supporting children and youth, unquote, whilst we are at it. So this means that the issue of hate speech is all over the world. In other words, it is universal, an unprecedented problem across the globe among humans, and it evolves in a very dangerous way. Ladies and gentlemen, I have a few questions that need to be answered to clear my mind on some of these issues we are supposed to deliberate on within this allotted time. My first question: why would people hate? And the second one, I want to talk about the challenges. The third, political campaigns and their impact on the people. The fourth, whose fault is it when our governments are completely having a hard time to ensure the laws, to enforce the laws to curtail hate speech? Then the next one, how do you preserve freedom of expression from sponsorship? Then the media and its role. Then the last one, some suggested solutions. Now, let me take them one by one for a moment. And the first question is, why would people hate? Sometimes people hate to satisfy one of their basic needs. That's why they hate. The need of being accepted in the community, or to be known by all, or to be popular among the peers. But most oftentimes, people are so much aware that negative news travels very far. It draws people's attention more, and politicians use this gimmick a lot all over the world, and here in Ghana too. And then the next one, we have some challenges too. A major challenge is that negative news and or disinformation are shared very fast through social media, or better still, traditional media. By the time authorities get ready to act on the falsehood, it has spread all over to friends and acquaintances. Over time, that disinformation is ingrained into the heads of followers. Then it becomes permanent, and no matter what authorities do, will make any difference. These hateful content over time also can surface and become popular among certain people. It is happening right here in Ghana, and more so in the developed democracies of America and Europe. Fojo Asante Fojo in 2019 lamented further in an article that he wrote, and I quote, "If there's anything that might likely derail Ghana's current democratic gains, then it should be said that hate speech, falsehood, and incitement must be feared," unquote. And I like that a lot. Another potent issue is political campaigns and their impact on the populace. It must be said that political campaigns in Ghana are a typical example of how easy it is to gather citizens against their neighbor, against their friends, against their enemies, rather than gather them for a given cause. They are always talking about against rather than for. Politicians rarely talk about issues, and they trot around the country and they find ways and means to tear down the opponent into pieces using hate expression. Hate appears in every discipline. It is present not only in gossip websites, but also in politics. One would experience hatred where groups of people are, or where people try to find out whether you are their kind, or whether he's part of us, she's part of us, or she's not part of us. She's not part of our party. She's with somebody else, whether you are with us or not. Who belongs and who doesn't belong. It is all over the political arena. Next on my list is the question, whose fault is it as governments struggle to enforce national laws to curtail hate speech? We are all practically responsible as citizens. The media, the legislature, the executive branch, law enforcement apparatus, you and I, we are all responsible. We are responsible for peace and security of this country, and we must be vigilant about it if in fact we need a peaceful society. Now, how do you preserve freedom of speech from sponsorship? As a cardinal rule, we must always preserve freedom of speech. Freedom of opinion and expression are indeed the foundations of human rights, which support free and democratic societies. These freedoms further support other important rights, such as peaceful assembly, to participate in public affairs, and freedom of religion. My next question that I asked before also goes to the role of the media in all this. Is my next question. It is a fact that digital media, including social media, have strengthened the right to seek, receive, and impart pertinent information and ideas. However, sometimes delicate information that are fed to the public are false, and the misinformation could cause unrepairable damages, such as peace and security of the nation, all at the expense of the general public. Unlike traditional media, online hate speech can be produced and shared easily and anonymously. Its ability to reach vast number of people instantly around the world is enormous. Last but not least, solutions. What do we do then? I have a few. To counter hate speech, and again, the UN expects more positive speech from our leadership. And this goes to our politicians and the citizenry. to show and demonstrate respect for all, and furthermore maintain freedom of expression as the norm. Any legislative effort to control hate speech will undoubtedly raise some concerns from other quarters that is an attempt to silence the opposition. As far as social media is concerned, we must hold internet companies responsible for moderating and removing content considered to be against the laws of Ghana. Whilst we are at it, I urge legislators to consider what kinds of speech is protected and where the limits are. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Nene Sakito, the second Kono of Manyakrob and President of the Eastern Region House of Chiefs, for actually breaking everything down for us. Let's give him another round of applause. He's identified the problem and he's proposed solutions. Thank you very, very much. We have a lot of institutions here present, but let me just say that we are live on the JoyNews channel. This morning, we have the National Peace Council here. We have the Ghana Independent Broadcasters Association, CDD Ghana, Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Training Center, the Data Protection Commission, West African Network for Peace Building, United Nations Information Center, West African Civil Society Initiative, the Thermoport, Ministry of Information, Ministry of Communication, Ghana Pentecostal and Charismatic Council, the Ghana Anti-Corruption Coalition, as well as USAID, Star Ghana Foundation, Ghana Institute of Journalism, IDEG, National Media Commission, and Abantu. I'd like to also acknowledge the presence of the Deputy Ambassador for Norway, who's here, Chira Home. If you're here, just give us a wave. Thank you very much. The Second Secretary, Australian High Commission, Hannah Crothers, if you're here. Let's just see you as you give us a wave, okay? We also have the German Ambassador, Daniel Kroll, who is also here with us. Thank you very much. We have Naval Captain Labi, representing the Ghana Armed Forces, also here. Just give us a wave. Thank you very, very much. And we also have the Ghana Journalists Association here. Lieutenant Colonel A. Mate, who is also with the Ghana Armed Forces, is also here. Just give us a wave. And the National Intelligence Bureau, they are also here. Well, I talked about the Information Ministry being here, and we have the Deputy Information Minister, Fatih Abubakar, who will give us some brief remarks. Let's welcome her with a round of applause.
Thank you so much, Winston. Mr. Chairman and Chairman of the National Peace Council, the President of the Eastern Regional House of Chiefs, Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, permit me to stand on all further protocol and say good morning. On behalf of the Minister of Information, Honorable Kojo Oppong-Nkrumah, and management and staff of our ministry, I extend our warmest compliments to you and also assure you that we are fully behind the Media Foundation of West Africa and its partners in their effort to educate the Ghanaian public on the impact of hate speech on our media and also on our democracy. The message is simple. Hate speech is a threat to democracy and a threat to the media. I remember my mother used to tell me stories about incidents in the 1970s and the 1980s. And she used to say that a young soldier with no experience, nothing at all will stop the person from walking to the only media house in Ghana and trying as much as possible to seize the space, the broadcasting space, because there was only one TV station, one radio station. So it was so simple for anyone to say, if I am able to capture the media house and broadcast to Ghanaians and the world that I am in charge of this country, the person was as good as a president or a leader of this country. We no longer live in those times. Times have changed. By virtue of democracy and the Fourth Republican Constitution, we have the benefit of multiple media houses, be it news, radio, newspapers, radio, and also TV. It is therefore our responsibility as children of the golden age, who have the benefit to see and exercise the full complement of freedom of expression and freedom of speech as guaranteed under Article 21, Clause 1A of the 1992 Constitution. We have a duty to hand over a media space or democratic space that is better than what we have been given now. And the threat in the way, as has been acknowledged by previous speakers, has to do with how we use the platforms that we are given. Hate speech, misinformation, and disinformation, and all the other conversations that are not nuanced, that does not take into consideration of the fact that I am churning out this information. They will definitely reach my targets, but beyond my targets are those unintended recipients of those information. So as a political communicator, as someone within the political space, as Mr. Sule Brahima was talking about the data they collected and was giving out the information that they had received as to culprits, I was sitting there knowing that that bullet will not escape me. Definitely, it falls on me greatly that at an individual level, I exercise that kind of accountability and restraints to make sure that I don't use anybody's platform to churn out hate speech. And I also encourage my brothers and sisters across the political divide that we also try as much as possible to exercise caution. Think about the children at home who are listening or watching us during prime time and consuming those information and thinking it is okay to also express themselves the way most of us have expressed ourselves using the various platforms in the country. So I would like to urge all of us that our responsibility really is to make sure that we do not see either substantial or total collapse of any of the organs of state, be it the judiciary, the executive, or the legislature, because it is evident that in countries where people thought that it is as simple as a radio conversation talking about, you know, tribalism, religious differences, talking about political differences in ways that are insightful and that are hurtful and that will force people to say it doesn't even matter if I die, I will do my worst. It hasn't helped them and it will not help Ghana. So thank you so much for this forum, and I believe this will not be the last of it. Anytime you reach out to the Ministry of Information, count us as allies. We will come and support you and make sure that collectively we are able to educate Ghanaians. Thank you so much for the audience.
Thank you very much, Fatih Abubakar, who's Deputy Minister of Information. Let me also acknowledge the presence of Grace Lee, who is Political Counselor, Canadian High Commission, if you're here. Okay. Great. Thank you very much for making time to be here. So it's now time for our keynote speech, and we'd invite the United Nations Resident Coordinator, Ghana, Charles Abani, with a round of applause. Let's welcome him.
I know she's, good morning everybody. I know she's rushed out of the room, the Deputy Minister, but I do want you to applaud her in absentia for an amazing, articulate delivery without a single piece of paper in front of her. She is indeed worthy of the position she occupies. Thank you. The chairman of the occasion, my own friend Dr. Ernest Adu-Jamfi, who is also the chairman of the National Peace Council, the representative of the National House of Chiefs, the Deputy Minister of Information who has left the room, the Executive Director of the Media Foundation for West Africa. I also consider you my friend, Sulemana. The Executive Secretary of the National Media Commission, George Sapong, the President of the Ghana Independent Broadcasters Association, representatives of various embassies here. Let me single out my brother Daniel from the German Embassy, Ambassador, Deputy Kier from Norway, and colleague from Australia, but other excellencies here present too. Those who lead political parties and represent the political parties, faith-based leaders, media, ladies and gentlemen. If I've missed any protocol, please forgive me. I always like to do this, particularly because I think it says something about who's in the room and who needs to hear what is being said. Let me first express my gratitude to the organizers putting together such an important event to deliberate what appears to be now one of the most pervasive forms of violence on people and societies. In an era where information spreads rapidly and influences public opinion, to engage in an open and honest dialogue about hate speech, media and democracy is one of the best moves to maintaining our democratic gains as a country. It is also timely as it heralds the UN International Day for Countering Hate Speech, which is celebrated annually on the 18th of June, to remind all parties of the significance of tolerance, peace, diversity, and a unified nation and globe. Let me also bring you fraternal greetings from the UN family, both here in Ghana, and thank you for taking part in this forum. Media, hate speech, and democratic consolidation in Ghana is the topic which I will speak to. While the whole story is more complex, let us focus on these and the importance of these. And in a world of rising conflict and division, a new sense of populist nationalism rising, and especially in our sub-region, this topic is pertinent. And I thank you for focusing on this. Also mindful that we're just minutes away in political language from probably what will be Ghana's most hotly contested and keenly contested elections as it moves towards its 30th year in the Fourth Republic. Earlier speakers have already made great points, and so I acknowledge them, and I'm sure the panel will do the same. So let me flick through some of the points that I had to make here. Hate speech refers to any form of communication, written, oral, symbolic, that is offensive, stigmatizes, and promotes or incites violence, discrimination, or hostility against individuals or groups based on their inherent characteristics, such as race, ethnicity, religion, culture, gender, sexual orientation, or other identities, including socioeconomic class, and that discriminates against them and promotes violence, including xenophobia, and threatens social peace and order. It seeks to divide, let's understand it. It also seeks to weaponize. And these are important terms in understanding it, because when someone says something with an intent to do something, they are weaponizing. And I think this language is important to understand. It weaponizes difference and division rather than emphasizes similarity, commonality, and the things that will bring us together. And it is usually characterized by vitriolic content. And it is often explained away, as one of the speakers said, as a robust conversation. We are just disagreeing now. And yet, in that obfuscation, it has huge impact. Of course, the definitions are in dispute because of that conflict that appears between the concept of hate speech and the right to express freedom of opinion and expression and equality. Whether written or not written, it emphasizes the difference in a way that is clearly unhelpful. And the UN Secretary General has just this year said, and I quote, "Hate speech is an alarm bell." You know what an alarm bell is? Ding, 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 be warned. The louder it rings, the greater the threat of violence and genocide. It precedes and promotes violence. And our history is littered with evidence and stories, many of which you've heard today, from the Holocaust, Cambodia, Srebrenica, against the Rohingyas, and many examples here on the West Coast. And many that even don't get documented, because this also affects individuals. And so while we talk to some of the iconic cases that we know about, we must be aware that this is actually a daily event that impacts people negatively. In its forward on the UN strategy and plan for action, the UN Secretary General states, quote, "Addressing hate speech does not mean limiting or prohibiting freedom of speech. It means keeping hate speech from escalating into something more dangerous, particularly incitement to discrimination, hostility, and violence, and which is prohibited under law." And so I think the law is an important way to distinguish between my right to say anything and something that actually is inciting. Democratic consolidation refers to the process by which democratic states solidifies its institutions, norms, and practices to become more stable and resilient. It involves building strong democratic institutions, fostering a sense of participation and civic engagement, promoting the rule of law, protecting human rights, ensuring free and fair ways for difference to be accommodated, not brought into sharp relief for divisive reasons. Hate speech undermines social cohesion and inclusion, fosters discrimination, and escalates violence and persecution, and can curtail the principles of equality, respect, and freedom of expression. It thus poses a significant challenge to democratic societies and can fuel and undermine the trust in institutions, erode the foundations, the very foundations of democracy, and will lead, in many instances, to marginalization and exclusion of certain groups, hinder constructive dialogue, and promote intolerance. Freedom of opinion and expression are indeed cornerstones of human rights and pillars for a free and democratic society. These freedoms support other fundamental rights, such as peaceful assembly, to participate in public affairs, and freedom of religion, among others. The rapid expansion of social media platforms, particularly digital media, and the rise of citizen-led media people has also given rise to grave concerns, blurring the line between hate speech, freedom of speech, which is a fundamental human right. It is undeniable that the digital media, including social media, on the one hand has bolstered the right to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas, and on the other has increasingly contributed to a divided world full of conflict, amplified by difference and disagreement. Therefore, legislative efforts to regulate freedom to free expression unsurprisingly raise concerns that attempts to curb the speech may seek to diminish freedoms, silence dissent and opposition, and ultimately lead to dictatorship. We must be mindful not to use freedom of speech as a shield to propagate hatred or incite violence. To consolidate democracy, it is crucial to strike that balance between freedom of expression and combating hate speech. Democracies have legal frameworks in place to address hate speech, including laws that criminalize incitement to violence or discrimination based on protected characteristics. However, it is essential to ensure these measures do not inadvertently limit legitimate expression or impede media freedom. Ladies and gentlemen, let us make no mistake. Hate speech is divisive and inimical to peace and security, and it cannot simply be ignored. It is profitable to those who perpetrate it. It gains traction in the minds of those who consume it. It has devastating impacts on its targets, triggering displacement, harm, death, and even itself begets more hate speech. It impacts and perpetuates and entrenches injustice. So, we must do several things. First, leaders must lead by example. And when I describe leaders, I don't just mean political leaders. Very often when we talk about elections, we quickly focus on our politicians and political leaders. But there are leaders everywhere. We have traditional leaders. We have leaders in government. We have community leaders. We have citizens and civil society actors who all exhibit the signs and practice leadership. So let us not point fingers, because, as they say, when you point one, three usually are pointing back at you. If we want a society where we are free from this, then leaders must hold themselves to the very highest standards. They must confront it with clear courage of conviction wherever it rears its ugly head, and certainly among their followers. You cannot be a leader unless you have followers. So anybody who is saying, I just said it myself, don't say that, because you have followers and they are following you and listening to you. Ghana is known for its vibrant democracy and has made significant strides in recent history. We have witnessed successful elections, peaceful transitions of power, and a growing sense of political inclusion and participation among its citizens. Indeed, this country is a beacon of hope to many of us on the continent. However, alongside these positive developments, we must not overlook the challenges that arise from narrower interests. Equally, in pursuit of common ground and what the majority agree, leaders must listen to the voice of those who are unheard. Democracy is not simply that the majority has its way. It is that the minority also get the opportunity to be heard and to be responded to. The misuse of media to achieve narrow ends cannot be totally disconnected from the rise of hate speech. Ensuring that this leadership is responsible across the board, in politics, in our places of worship, in traditional institutions, in all our gatherings, for men and women, and with our youth. In short, in every realm of leadership. We must have strong institutions driven by clear intent to foster open dialogue and mindful of the strong enough to challenge hate speech when we see it. With the rise of artificial intelligence and with all its strong and beneficial positive force, there are new challenges which are on the horizon. We must rise to these challenges as they present in Ghana. Ghana has a number of important institutions: the National Peace Council, SHRAJ, the National Media Commission, NCC, and many others. Let us acknowledge their hard work, and as we say, Ayeko, call for more. We need more. And institutions must be alive to this rapidly changing external context and frightening sometimes new technological developments, where suddenly it is possible to hear someone saying, even this speech re-recorded and appearing to be me saying the exact opposite of what I'm actually saying. And then having the catalytic capacity to exponentially release that information into a public without any hindrance at all, using technology and digital forms. We do indeed live in times where we need to be extremely cautious. Understanding and managing artificial intelligence for good will be critical in reducing the possibility and impact of hate speech. Citizens groups and civil society are a key space where social aspirations congregate and aggregate. These spaces and their leadership must work intentionally to exclude hate narratives, even as they strive to gain airtime for their issues. And we must start to promote generative dialogue, moving away from opposition win-lose mindsets on various arguments and contestation where only one victor can emerge, to a more empathetic and generative conversation, which is key to delivering solutions on some of the key issues where conflict lines exist and where, if you like, we characterize global wicked problems. And so in Ghana here, I call you all to pause just for a moment and consider what some of these are. The contestations between settlers and herders. The contestations between different peoples over land, which we know have resulted in conflicts that perpetrate over many years and have now built in new stereotypes of individuals. The social contestations around the importance of different ethnic groups, of different religions. And every country and every community has examples that it can reflect on, because this is going to be important in how we deal with it. The media, let me come to you, must understand its power and use this for good. We all know that bad news and controversy travels fast and makes money. It does. So if we're going to tell bad news because it's true, then let us not sensationalize it. Let us not turn it into a money spinner. I always told you, those who perpetrate hate speech profit from it. And sometimes that profit is not financial, but a lot of the time it is financial. The media is a major source of information and acts as a catalyst for shaping public opinion and influencing social trends. Its extensive and widespread reach and ability to disseminate ideas and perspectives to a large audience make the media one of the most powerful and pervasive tools available in our world. And the reach of the media has, with everything, gained exponential acceleration in impact because of technology. The media plays a crucial role in democratic societies by providing information, fostering public debate, and holding duty bearers to account. A free, safe, and independent media is essential for the functioning of a democracy, as it ensures the flow of accurate and diverse information to citizens. Media outlets, newspapers, television, radio, online platforms have the power to shape public opinion, influence political processes, facilitate the exchange of ideas, and act as a bridge between the government and its citizens, allowing for free flow and diverse perspectives to be contended with. It helps foster an informed citizenry and promote transparency and trust in democratic processes. Its pervasive role cannot be used to promote negative, false, and divisive statements that speak to the benefit of only one segment of society. When media platforms are used to spread hate speech, it has had a detrimental effect on democratic consolidation. Additionally, promoting media literacy and critical thinking skills among citizens can help individuals discern between credible information and hate speech, enable them to actively participate in the democratic process, and counter the speech of harmful narratives. Striking a balance between freedom of expression and combating hate speech is essential. Media organizations have a responsibility to uphold ethical standards and promote responsible journalism. They should prioritize fact-checking, objectivity, accuracy, develop mechanisms to swiftly address complaints, and rectify any disinformation or misinformation or hate speech which they may have been disseminated, rather than dodge it for fear that maybe they'll be called to book or called to order or sued. Simultaneously, it's essential for the government to play a proactive role in ensuring the regulation of media platforms without infringing on freedom of speech. Appropriate measures should be implemented to prevent the spread of hate speech, such as developing the clear guidelines, and we welcome those that have recently been developed, and legal frameworks that distinguish between legitimate criticism and incitement to violence. Let us take this moment to congratulate and acknowledge the efforts of the National Peace Council and the National Media Commission for the recent launch of guidelines on hate speech and other forms of indecent expression in Ghana, which is aiming to sanitize the airwaves. Democratic consolidation in Ghana hinges on creating an environment where we can all work together. Finally, I think everybody can do something. Pause as you see hate speech happen. Refrain from making a hateful comment and relaying it to others. Check the facts. React. Don't just let it happen, because it's tough. Even though it means that you must challenge something that is controversial, find a non-hateful way to do that. Challenge. Support. Taking a public stand with those who are victims is really important. Report. Telling the authorities where this occurs is really helpful. Educate, mediate, and moderate. And I think we've talked about this. The UN has been actively involved in various issues on hate speech. I'm sure you can find all of these, so I won't bore you with that particular area. Ghana's democracy can and must thrive moving forward, because actually this is one of the beacons. And I think all the actors, including the media, but not only the media, are really called to the table. Ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude by commending the Media Foundation for West Africa, MPC, NMC, the National House of Chiefs, and JoyNews for putting together this high-profile forum as a platform for dialogue, understanding, and collective action to safeguard our democratic values and foster a society built on tolerance, inclusivity, and peace. Whether as member states, private sector actors, the media, faith-based organizations, educators, civil society actors, diplomatic corps members, or individuals, we must all speak out firmly against instances of hate speech and play a critical role in countering them. Barack Obama says, even if you want to recount history, recount it in a way that heals, not divides. Sitting on the fence is not an option. Let's enhance resilience against this phenomenon as we build the Ghana that Ghana aspires to see, and those of us in the UN are here to support. I thank you for listening and wish you the very best.
Thank you very, very much, Charles Abani, who's UN Resident Coordinator Ghana. Let's give him another round of applause. So we all have a role to play. All of us must show leadership, and that is very important. As a journalist, I've picked a lot, and I'm sure that the GJA President, Albert Jomfo, who's here, just show us by hand, has also been picking a lot. Later on we'll hear from him. We also have Iyoko here with us, and we have the NCCE, the RTI Commission. Okay, so it's now time for us to get into the panel discussion on media hate speech and democratic consolidation in Ghana. And the panelist, Cecil Sunkwamels, is President, Ghana Independent Broadcasters Association. Let's welcome him with a round of applause. Clara Berry-Kasati is a lawyer and vice chair of the board of directors, CDD Ghana. Let's welcome her also. Dr. Festus Obin is regional coordinator, research and capacity building, West African Network for Peace Building. And last but not least, George Sapong, Executive Secretary of the National Media Commission. Well, thanks to all of you for making time to join us for this all-important conversation. And so we'll start it this way. I'd ask your preliminary thoughts on hate speech and everything, and we'll get into the specifics. So we'll start by finding out from you, George, since you're very close to me. What are the real threats that hate speech, intolerance, and disinformation pose to Ghana's democracy?
Winston, this is certainly the wrong way to start. You ought to have started from those who know. But I think that let me make some preliminary comments before I come to that. Number one is to thank Sule and the team. Number two is to suggest that perhaps if we knew that we were going to have such a vital national seminar from His Excellency Charles Abani, from Reverend Dr. Adujanfi Enene, I would have said this discussion should center on the specifics that they have told us because they have deeply defined the challenges for us. And I do not want to dilute anything from what they have said. Essentially, the three things that I want to repeat from what they have said is: one, communication. Two, it's the weaponization of it. Three is the targeted nature of it. Okay? And put together the destructive element within that. So for me, these are the critical elements. When we come back, I will try to deal with two specific things from what His Excellency and the Chairman Peace Council have said, and then get back to the critical question that Nene raised, which in my view defines the path forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let me get to you, Cecil Sunkwamils. You could share your thoughts on the same question: the real threats that hate speech, intolerance, and disinformation pose to Ghana's democracy.
Thank you, Winston. I think, apology. I think the first thing is I would like to thank Media Foundation for this platform to discuss this issue. It helps us to delve into some key pointers that we looked at specifically for the media landscape and this kind of situation that we sit in. And being a major translator of information and communication across our country, strengthening our democracy. Hate speech, we know it exists in different dimensions, both in and out of this country. Where our challenge has been, and which we will try to define, is where does it start from the point of freedom of expression and speech, and where does it end? So the definition of these lines are something that we need to define. So for media people, of which I actually also am representing more today, we're able to clearly define these boundaries and together look at how we can strengthen the media so we can manage hate speech through all the means that are possible, including education.
Thank you very much, Cecil. Clara?
Thank you very much, Winston. I have the easy task of standing on all the thanks already to Media Foundation for West Africa and previous speakers for giving us a head start on this topic, because we know what it has done to other democracies. Now, when it comes to hate speech and democracy, it's always, I would say, an interesting topic because of the specific role that speech plays in democracy. And this is because when you take democracy, the media speech is at the corner, it's one of the cornerstones to be able to tell whether a democracy works well or not. Because also we know that apart from the hard law, democracy thrives on certain values. So speech, the media, is one of the ways that you measure. But the speech also comes, it is also from there that democracy can also be attacked, because you can also use that to defeat democratic principles, and that is how speech, hate speech comes in. We know what hate speech has done in other democracies, particularly on the African continent. It has led to incitement, it has led to violence like genocide in Rwanda and unrest in Kenya and other African countries. So if we are able to, I think the measure for the maturity of democracy has something to do with how we are able to handle hate speech. And when I'm talking about handling hate speech, I'm talking about how we are able to regulate and identify it. As we all agree, we need to start by having a consensus on what constitutes hate speech. And as previous speakers have noted already, we then have to decide how we are going to regulate it. One key way is for all of us to speak up against it, as it has been said, to have the courage to speak up against it. But we know, I don't think it is in doubt that anybody knows what hate speech can do. It can actually end the democracy for us that we can enjoy. And not just that, it can lead to loss of lives and other unrest in any democracy, including Ghana's.
Thank you very much, Clara. Dr. Obin.
Thank you very much. Let me also start by, first of all, thanking the Media Foundation for the invitation to be part of this important discussion. The disadvantage of speaking as the last speaker on questions like this is for you to repeat what others have already said. But I will highlight 3 key points in terms of how hate speech threatens our democracy. One is that hate speech also limits free speech, in the sense that it prevents people from willingly contributing to public discussions. We've been talking about the fact that how do you balance free speech and expression, as well as how do you deal with those who go beyond that. But one of the disadvantages is that it also limits free speech, and even it also threatens people's participation in public life and also in politics, especially when it's targeted at women. We have a lot of competent women who have refused to engage in public life or politics, all because of the fear of abusive words and all that. Then lastly is that hate speech also undermines confidence and trust in state institutions, especially institutions that deal with electoral processes like the Electoral Commission, the judiciary. These are critical institutions in our democratic consolidation process. And when they are targeted with hate speech, it really undermines confidence and trust in these institutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So you see, you didn't repeat what everybody had said. Anyway, let me get back to you, George. And this time around, you had talked about weaponization of the media. and Clara talk about, regulation. So let me start off with you, because you are with the NMC. What regulatory measures does the NMC have in place to control weaponization of the media to incite hate speech or spread misinformation and disinformation?
Directly on that, the National Media Commission had tried to address not only hate speech, but a number of speech infractions in LI 2224, which was the content standards in electronic communication that the Supreme Court disagreed with. We strongly believe that the more technology evolves, more and more the judiciary is getting to realize the inherent weaknesses in that decision. But let me share some quick thoughts with you. I think this is about 2008, thereabouts, when immediately after the post-conflict crisis, the crisis in Kenya, UNDP and Charles, I think your team needs to claim greater credit for peace support processes in Africa than you do. I'm sitting at Lake Naivasha with Ozonia, who is now the UN press rep for Rwanda. We had met with the big guys in the media in Kenya because we are anticipating the Ocampo report, and we suspected that some journalists are going to be indicted. Two of the people that we strongly suspected, based on the parameters of the assessment, that their names could come up, come from different tribes. And my first discussion with Mr. A, he lambasted Mr. B so strongly why he was involved in hate speech and why he strongly suspected that Mr. B would be named. In my conversation with Mr. B, he was like, he can't understand why Mr. A would put himself in the danger that he did for the hate speech that he was perpetrating. But what was most interesting to me is that anybody I spoke from the tribe of Mr. B saw nothing wrong with what Mr. B had done and had concerns about Mr. A's situation. That is the normalization of interest. If you came to Ghana here, if you ask the MPP and the NDC about the hate speech implications of or die be die or boot for boot, you will get the same kind of thing. So the danger is that those who perpetrate it, especially if they're in the majority, never see what is wrong with what they do. As we get into discussions about hate speech, we've had legislation and things like that. You are going to see that even today here, comments that have come as very harmless will become political. And I'm giving you two. Sorry, Reverend and Charles, if I center on you, because if you listen to the definition that Reverend Dr. Adujamfi offered for hate speech, included in the identity factors for targeting was targeting on the basis of sexual orientation. Mr. Abani used the same frame. If you brought it to Ghana, within the context of the debate over the LGBTQI law, Reverend Adujamfi may come under heavy attack from the church community for including sexual orientation, because in that space, it would imply that attacks on people in the LGBTQI community would constitute hate speech under the current framing of international law, just like you had done. So whilst within the broad framework, all of us tend to understand that there is something called hate speech that is bad, we tend to think of it in terms of when it is hate against us. But when it is hate against others, it gets normalized. And that is where the challenge about framing regulatory response emerges. I still think that if we are going to construct one decent democratic society, we'll have to muster the courage that these two great men have started with to say, where are the identity factors and who needs to be protected? And lastly, I come to Nene's point When it raises the question about Parliament defining the legitimate boundaries of free expression and what expression is not protected, essentially he's hinting at something that professionally we refer to as the epistemic fallibility of the state. In other words, everybody believes that we need to regulate something, but because you don't trust the state, and everybody is thinking about the moment you bring in the state, they will abuse that power, we withdraw from deeper reflection and move into a corner of space because we don't want to bring this here because we fear that there will be abuse. It seems to me that we've gotten to that point where all of us need to relax, sit back, and say, there is only one thing that matters, the protection of our society. And if you are going to do that, something will have to give. If that something is indecency, violence in public expression, I think we should have the courage to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, George. But so talking about, the airline that the Supreme Court, questioned all, are you taking any other steps to ensure that some regulation is put in place?
Our view at this stage is that as we see the global trends evolve, when we were in court, I remember that one of the judges asked our lawyer, where has this been done before? At the time, there was no example. As we sit 8 or so years now, Freedom House released a report recently that says 2/3 of the world has legislation in that form. About 2 months ago, UNESCO had a big discussion on Internet for Trust, this time just dealing with online issues, and has come up with very clear ideas about what could be the foundation for legislation in that field. Our thinking is that maybe we run ahead of ourselves.
Okay.
This is the movement, and we are ready to come back to the discussion.
And so you're ready to engage?
Sure.
Great. Let me get to you, Cecil. I'll get back to you, George, but let me get to you, Cecil. So let me find out whether the Ghana Independent Broadcasters Association has any guidelines in place to discourage hate speech and promote decent broadcasting.
Yes, Winston. The Ghana Independent Broadcasters Association, we have a code of conduct for members. One of our aims is actually to ensure that even though we look at our membership, whatever we do covers the whole industry. We have a code of conduct. We look at the specific articles within the code of conduct. And 3, if I'm fair, 8 specifically, Article 8 specifically deals with hate speech. If we pick we have Article 8 specifically talks on hate, incitement, insulting speech specifically. It goes on say not to fund and not to blame by broadcast of programs, language, passions, and activities that may lead to violence and disrupt the peace of the country. There are other ones that support free speech, encourage free speech, and also sets limitations on what is speech. A couple of other clauses. So we have these articles. What we do is, for members, is we keep getting, though it may be the same entity, you get different management and changes within. So we actually do education with that. Besides our code of conduct, we also fall on other relief, that of the NMC, to do education. One of the biggest challenges, this education and transitioning this information to broadcast, is the growing number of broadcast stations in this country, which is also another dimension of managing this hate issue. Much as we have over 300 members that are armed, we currently have 700 radio stations, TV stations, some that are not within our membership. But however, we work with the NMC and we try to reach all these stations through education along the media platform.
Great. While you may have these laws in place, the other important question is enforcement of them. I mean, these are, things that you've put in place, and the extent to which your members submit or adhere to these guidelines. How do you enforce them, and do your members adhere to these guidelines?
Fortunately, members have been compliant largely. I think we most recently something that was just circulated that we're working on. But we actually do have penalties. We have fines, we have warnings, and we can expel you from the membership. However, it would also be great if we have had this discussion of having a broader coverage for those who are non-members. And these have been in discussion with both the Ministry of Information, the NMC, and including the Ministry of Communication and other bodies. But this is to introduce, we have been discussing a bill which was evolving to finally a law or an act which would cover the whole landscape. One area that we actually also are not able to cover, there's a huge presence, is on the online station. We've seen a lot of stations evolve. They transmit directly into our country, and we don't seem to have covered that area. But they basically are delivering the same thing, and you can have aspects of hate coming through these channels. So with maybe a bill that we actually have been also pushing for, dealing with it, is to allow us to be able to completely, as much as possible, be updated in terms of regulating all these spaces.
What's that bill you're pushing for together with the GJA? What's that bill? You
the
said
broadcasting bill.
Okay.
The broadcasting.
I get you. Let me bring in Clara at this point and find out how important media literacy is in combating hate speech.
Okay. Okay, before I answer that, let me come in from the regulation, because regulation has a lot of the time been considered as one of the ways to address it. But the truth about a regulation is that the law is always a double-edged sword. So it's just like it has been noted that there was an ally that the Supreme Court struck down, not just in Ghana. Because there are always constitutional provisions on freedom of expression, freedom of the media, freedom for journalists, there are certain things set in the Constitution. So any regulation that falls foul of that is going to be struck down. Apart from the regulation, there is always that jurisprudential angle as to whether or not free speech should be regulated, as to whether or not that in itself undermines one of the democratic principles, which is freedom of speech. But that is where the media education comes in. Because if the media, we can start the discussion, and then we are all, in terms of values, we are all agreed that no, certain utterances are not acceptable in our society. And the reason they are not acceptable is because they lead to A, B, C, D. We can start from there. So we start from the condemnations, and that when they are uttered, we all don't keep quiet, but all leadership angles, whether religious, traditional, political, or social, everybody who has an influential voice speaks up, not just to condemn, but also to talk about the positive aspects, to address those things. It helps. When we all come to the understanding and consensus as to what hate speech is, we should not, for example, have the problem whether Reverend has to worry about whether or not hate speech directed at people having a certain sexual orientation is hate speech or not. Because by then we are all agreed that it doesn't matter who it is directed at, and it doesn't matter what it is about. If you speak in A, B, C, D, it amounts to hate speech. If the media is able to help in terms of the education out there for us to agree, it makes it easier. So traditional people, whether it's religious or traditional people, won't have a problem identifying hate speech when they say it. When we set this groundwork and regulation then follows, one, it makes it easier to be able to define the parameters of the regulations to comply with constitutional provisions, so that we do not, again, in attempting to grow our democracy, repress the democracy. So for me, the media coming back, using the media coverage, using people to speak up, to have the engagements, for me, provides the foundation for regulation to come in. I think we have a head start in the sense that the National Peace Council already has guidelines. So we have a point that we can start from. What I would probably then want to ask about is how well known are these guidelines in our public space to all of us? Thank you.
Great. Let me bring Dr. Obing here because, I mean, you are talking about regulation, but for you, Clary, actually start by asking the question, should free speech be regulated? I don't know what your take is on that, Dr. Obing. What do you say about that?
Okay. So in terms of regulation, yes, at some point it has to, especially when it goes beyond inciting hatred, threatening the life of people, when it also undermines the human rights of other people. I think at that point, some kind of regulation has to be put in place because we need to look at the public good. All right, we need to look at the public good. Although when it comes to regulating, we also have to be careful in order not to undermine people's freedom of speech and also people's freedom of expression. But certainly at some point, it has to be regulated. And that is why I see some of the initiative of the National Peace Council as a good start, because it's an evolving threat that certainly we need to deal with. And we cannot say that because our Constitution talks about freedom of speech and all that, we won't deal with threats that threatens the same freedom of speech by putting in place regulations to address any irresponsible statement that can undermine the peace and stability of the country. The good thing is also the UN also has a plan of action which countries can draw from in terms of putting in place measures to address the root causes of that. But also to say that regulation is also not the only antidote to addressing it, because there are root causes that borders on people's fears, that borders on people's grievances, which requires governance responses in dealing with them. So regulation is one dimension, but we also need to look at the root causes and deal with them.
Great. I saw George nodding. I'll get to you shortly. But I'm told that the owner of vehicle with registration number GR767718 is needed outside to move his vehicle. So please, if you are the owner of vehicle with registration number GR767718, please get outside and move your vehicle. So George, let me get back to you. I saw you nodding, but is the NMC struggling in its quest to sanitize the media space? Are you facing any challenges?
A big one.
Oh, share them with us.
We will say, first of all, and it ties in with what Clara started with, that beautiful analysis that Doc also follows. Across time and space, the question about what Nene put on the table, the content of free expression and the permissible boundaries, has engaged society throughout history. Okay. In the case of the US, I mean, tomes of jurisprudence on that. But one can always settle these issues around two core questions. When we speak of freedom of expression, freedom from what? And freedom for what? If you understand that freedom from what deals with all the restrictions and intimidations and threats and dangers that we can place on journalists. In our case, the challenge we have is that our Constitution appears to have clearly demonstrated the question about freedom from what? We know it is freedom from governmental interference. We know it is freedom from harassment. We know it is freedom from threats on journalists. What we did not do was to define freedom for what. Because if you're able to think through what the freedom is for, then anytime you encounter harmful communication, you are able to test it against, is this one of the things for which we created the freedom for ourselves? If it is not, and it creates harm, then it is easy to bring it under regulation. You understand? Okay. But there are examples all over the world. From the great thoughts that we had this morning, I did construct, and they're very consistent with what we know already. The 4 key things came from what the 3 great speakers said. What is freedom of expression for, particularly in our jurisdiction? 1, it is respect for individual autonomy and self-realization in politics, art, music, fashion. 2, it is exposure to enable us expose government incompetence and malfeasance. We know that. 3 is what Charles spoke about, a vote and a voice. It is not only enough that the citizen votes, but that his opinion counts in the formulation of public opinion and public policy. And then, maybe I can even stop there so we don't waste too much time. My view is that if we construct these as the normative reasons why we created the freedom, then any kind of communication that has the potential to throw society into chaos, that does not contribute to society's social, political, aesthetic, values, ought to be brought under regulation. The question that we ask ourselves further is, then what should be the legitimate sanctions against that? That is where we ought to be very careful in not creating a sanctions regime that creates what we call the chilling effect on expression. But my view is that either through history, through the jurisprudence of other states, or through our own constitution, defining a regulatory system that will sustain our democratic ethos and still prevent us from harm is highly possible. Thank you.
Great. Very soon we'll open the floor for questions from all of you. But Cecil, I asked Clara a question earlier. But since you are with the Ghana Independent Broadcasters Association, I'd love to find out how important media literacy is in combating hate speech and what your organization is doing to promote it. Yes, I think it's working. Go ahead. Well, I'm told your microphone isn't working. Okay, so yes, I'm sure they're changing it for you so that no, it's not working. So please take this microphone and then you start all over again. Great.
So GIBA, in partnership with UNICEF, the NMC, and a couple of other partners, but the code of conduct that I read earlier was actually put together in partnership with the UNICEF about 6-7 years ago, and we had a booklet. So that level of interest and education has been happening. What has been the challenge? Now the scale of people that we're reaching in terms of imparting that knowledge. Because the number of stations has actually also increased dramatically in the last few years. The other challenge is also for those who go out of what is the expectation. And here I would like to say, we talk about self-regulation, one of the ways. And by having a code of conduct, gives us the room to self-regulate within our membership. And also can be used as an example by other stations. But when there's an infraction out of our membership, that is always a challenge. But GIBA itself has had that. So I think about a couple of months ago, when the University of Ghana, the Department of School of Communications, came out with the State of the Ghana Media Report, it actually outlined 7 key things that actually impacts media performance, which has a direct effect on some of the things we want to achieve, like to reduce hate speech. When you go a bit further into what are some of the causes in the media space, for example, granting airtime and not controlling people who come on air to speak and such information is communicated or published, you realize that some of these inherent weaknesses that were outlined are actually things we have to sit together and deal with, which does not necessarily sit within the jurisdiction of media management, but it also sits with other parties who may be gathered here. That we need to work together to look at how we can deal with those 7 things that have been mentioned and to help us to reduce this hate speech.
Great. Thank you very much, Cecil. So time now for the floor to ask any questions that they have. If you have a question, just show by hand. We'll get a microphone to you, and then you'd be able to ask your question. Okay, I see. It means we're having a great conversation. We start from here. Then, so 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, let's do it like that. Okay, so let's get a microphone to the lady. You mention your name and the institution you are representing. Then you can go ahead and ask your question. And then later on, we'll get the panelists here to answer all the questions that you have. Yes. Please go ahead and tell us your name and the institution you're representing.
Okay, hi, good morning. My name is Genevieve Partington, and I'm the country director for Amnesty International Ghana. So I just have, a question. We know hate speech is, purported normally towards women. So according to the UNDP, recent evidence of violence against women in politics shows that online hate speech and harassment represent both serious and increasing obstacles to the ability of female political leaders to fulfill their mandates. So we all know that politics is already quite a hostile environment. So my question is, how can we, help women have a safer space? I think the media also has a role to play, because media also, although they don't start the hate speech, I feel like they instigate it sometimes. Okay. I'll give one example quickly. During the last election, there was a journalist, I will not mention his name, that was asking a candidate that was standing for a party. She was a woman candidate, and asking her questions like, so you are not married, so what do you do in your free time? How do you spend that? When you do that, you are instigating something. Then the public also starts. She's not married. She's single. How can she stand for political position? She's probably sleeping around, and then the hate starts. So it has to boil down from somewhere. The media has a lot to do. So that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. What's the next hand? Yes, you. Let's get the microphone to him, and let's make the question very brief so we can get a lot of you to ask questions. Yes, please.
Thank you. My name is Osman Abubakar Sadiq. I'm final year student at CIG. My question is premised on media and information. My final project work is on exploring the role of media literacy, cybersecurity awareness. The literature I have reviewed so far point to the fact that media literacy has something to do with cybersecurity. Also, has an adverse effect on hate speech. And so, online hate speech and media and information literacy are closely related. Look at data that I have. My question is, you've asked the whole hate speech. I want us to look at it from the point where media literacy is actually integrated in our various educational curriculum to ensure that students are aware of the adverse effects of the media, both online and digital. And so the question is, this is a comment, but the question is, how do we ensure continuous ability of media information.
Okay, thank you. Yes? Let's get to the next person. The next person is here. Okay. Okay, well, I mean, once you're there, just go ahead and give it to her. Yes, once you're there.
Thank you. My name is Ohiniwa Brown. I work with Action Aid Ghana. My question maybe would be directed to the Executive Secretary of NMC. I would like to find out, we have on several occasions seen media owners sit on their platform and use the platform to propagate hate speech. Can you help us understand what you normally do when you monitor such incidents, and then what kind of collaboration do you normally have with the Peace Council to ensure that such things don't continue? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's just pick the last one here for now, and then we'll come back. Yes, we'll come back.
Thank you very much. I am Apostle Emmanuel Tete, General Secretary for Ghana Pentecostal and Charismatic Council. Couple of observations for me has to do with the point that when hate speech is made somewhere, how do we deal with it in the public space? It looks like very often it is dealt with directly with the individual or person involved. But then if it will be dealt with very strongly, confronted in the public space, for others to also be deterred from going into that area, I think that would be helpful. But then, if we deal with it on the individual level, given the profile of the person involved, and so we go and meet him and we inform him that what you did wasn't right, we shouldn't be doing this, I may not know that something has been dealt with. I may repeat such. So my observation will be for a public confrontation with whoever is involved in such a way. But my question would be whether there are explicit laws, in our judicial system, to deal with and sanction hate speech. If there are, in your acknowledging, that is Winston, in your acknowledging the institutions present, I've not heard about a judiciary. And I wanted to find out whether it's an omission or they are actually represented here in terms of sanctioning people who perpetrate hate speech.
Thank you very much, Apostle. Let's get to the panel. I'll answer your question, okay? I'll answer that one, which was directed to me. But Clara, I think you take the first question about how we can help women have a safer space.
That's a difficult one. Because I don't know if I can qualify to talk about conflict of interest here, since I'm a woman. But yes, as already noted, the political space in itself is already hostile. And it's not just the political space that is hostile for us. Also, it is not very easy, even in the cultural space, for women in public life. So women already start politics disadvantaged. Disadvantaged culturally because being a woman and being out there in itself is hard culturally. And then you have to deal with people, put it back, and not just put it back in your face, more or less set up the society against you in several ways. So the women issue, one, it has to be addressed immediately. I think that in a situation where the example that was cited, where a woman was asked, okay, so you are not married, I think the journalist should have been called out immediately. Now, for women, I can understand that sometimes it's difficult for you to be the one doing the calling out immediately, particularly if you are in public life or political life. And the reason it is difficult